Hello and welcome to Spacewalk's Money Talks, where we talk about outer space, business, technology, and policy. I'm Chris Alvarez, and today's guest is John B. Herrington, who talks about space education, space business, and his time as a naval aviator and a mission specialist on a space shuttle mission. Thank you for listening. I'm speaking with Dr. John Herrington, who is a retired United States Naval Aviator and former NASA astronaut. And also the first enrolled member of a Native American tribe to fly into space. In addition, he's written Mission to Space, published in 2016 by Chickasaw Press, which is a children's book about his time training for the astronaut program and going into space. Thank you for speaking with me.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So I've touched on some of your background in space, but can you elaborate how you'd like about your background in space?
Yeah, it was 2 weeks that went by really quickly. No, it was the high point of my professional career for sure. Mm-hmm. Being able to to train to do something for quite a long period of time and then to go up and to do it well, I think was what we all want to do when we have a job to accomplish, and I felt like that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that afterwards, I guess 2016, you got a degree in education. Can you tell me about that endeavor?
Yeah, back in about, I'd say 2008, I was riding a bicycle across the country, and I pedaled through a town called Lewiston, Idaho, and I spoke to the Nez Perce tribe there in Lapway, and then some friends took me up to University of Idaho, and I met a gentleman up there who was a professor, who was Yaqui Indian, named Dr. Ed Galindo. And I had met Ed years before at the Columbia Memorial. He had flown a payload with a bunch of Fort Hall Native American students on the Columbia. Mm-hmm. And so I met him at the memorial down at the Kennedy Space Center. And when I met Ed in Idaho, he said, if you're ever interested in getting a PhD, come back and talk to me. Well, okay, I didn't live in Idaho. But it just so happened that the woman that was my host, I fell in love with. And I finished my bike ride and proposed to her in front of the countdown clock at the Kennedy Space Center. Mm-hmm. We got married, and I moved to Idaho. I called Ed up, and I said, okay, let's go. And I started about 2010. I graduated in 2014 with a degree, PhD in education.
Mm-hmm. So your degree in education, I believe that's to spread space education, but correct me if I'm wrong. What's the purpose? What's your goal there?
What my goal was is I looked at the factors that motivate and engage specifically Native American kids in math and science. And so I worked with Dr. Galindo, who was on my committee, and another professor, Aaron Thomas. They had run a NASA summer program called the NASA Summer of Innovation throughout the Montana, Wyoming, Idaho area. And they had one group of students in southern Idaho on the Duck Valley Reservation, Shoshone Paiute students. Mm-hmm. And I went down and I measured their interest based on a test they'd taken before and after this 1 week summer program. And I also did a case study, and I interviewed them about, what about that week did or did not change your interest in math and science. And it was a lot of fun. It was a small group of kids, but it was hands-on learning. It was the idea they could build rockets, they could build things with their hands, personalize them. They could work in a group. They could work with their friends and collaborate. So this idea of working together to accomplish a goal, but at the same time learning something that they may not have thought something about before. So it was that idea of hands-on learning. So, and that's how I learned. My entire career, how I did it in college, how I did better when I worked with my friends and I found a practical application to what I was learning. Mm-hmm. That's essentially what I did.
So let's step back in time then. When you were first, when you were young, a high school student and beyond, as a member, as Chickasaw, did you encounter obstacles as you moved forward, or did you have sort of a better situation and you wanted to help out people who didn't have as good a situation as you?
Well, I think in my case, my own obstacle was me. Mm-hmm. I went through high school like pretty much everybody else. I probably could have concentrated more, could have worked harder. I graduated and then went on to college with the notion I had to go to college. Mm-hmm. because my parents, said you need to go to school if you want to be successful in life. But I didn't know what I wanted to do, and they just kind of left it up to me. I ended up rock climbing my first year, and I didn't study much, and I got kicked out of school my first year for low grades. And my interest was outside the classroom, not inside. But luckily, my interest, rock climbing, got me a job as a rock climber in the mountains of Colorado, working on a survey crew on a highway. And I was fortunate the guy who worked for me, this idea of hands-on learning, because I was hanging off of a cliff with a piece of glass, a prism, and these guys would shoot an infrared beam of light to the prism I held. So I started asking questions. Well, how's that work? Light travels at a certain speed, constant velocity, and if you know the time it took to go from one point to the next, you can determine the distance. And if you know the angle of that beam of light, you can, essentially it's trigonometry. I was learning trig on the side of a cliff with a bunch of guys that enjoyed what they did. And the guy I worked for convinced me if I wanted to make something myself, I better go back to school because you can't make a living on $4 an hour.
Yeah.
And I listened to him, and that's what got me back into school.
So your focus on Native American students, did you feel that when you were younger, or is that something that came to you as you progressed in your career?
It came much later. I think what happened was, because my interest, since I got to NASA and they said I was the first, member of a federally recognized tribe, that when I went to do my work on my PhD, I was working with Native professors, and my interest was what motivated me to want to learn, what motivates other kids to learn. And so working with, my background and, my part of my heritage being Native American was that I wanted to work with kids to show them what I did as an astronaut, how I got to where I was, and then kind of figure out what works for them. Because a lot of the research is on why Native students aren't capable of finishing a higher degree or higher education because, what are factors, poverty or whatnot. Well, there's not a lot of research, very little research done on the factors of why they do succeed at it. And so we wanted to start scratching the surface of that and look at what are these factors that motivate and engage kids to want to study math and science. And so I looked at around the 5th to 8th grade level, because I have a lot of friends. They're Native American who are very accomplished engineers and scientists, lawyers, doctors. There's a lot of folks. But we wanted to capture that story, and so that's why I went down that path.
Do you and I've done some work in the past on reservations, and there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lack of resources, educational resources. In what ways do you think STEM could be made stronger on reservations? Apart, I guess resources and what else?
Well, I think the important thing is let them see it. Let them see others that are just like them that have been accomplished who are scientists. Show them role models. Show them people that are just like them that have gone off and accomplished something, and then hopefully bring something back to their classroom or to their teacher that gives them a connection to, say, engineering, for example. Let's look at what our ancestors were capable of doing. Our ancestors were incredible scientists, engineers. I mean, they built remarkable structures back over 1,000 years ago, when Europe was in the Dark Ages. You can talk about Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon. You can talk about, or Moundville, Alabama, or Cahokia, Illinois. These are places where Native peoples built remarkable structures, and they were observers of their world. They were astronomers. They were botanists. They were those things that I want kids to connect to what their heritage is, because then that gives them a sense of ownership, I think, and then maybe want to make them. They give them that motivation to learn, which we don't get that in our curriculum. We don't get that in our textbooks. And if you can provide it to them and examples of that, then maybe you can catch them, you can hook them, and get them interested.
And this is a question not just for Native American students, but just students in general, and also considering you wrote a book for children. When do you really want to get students, as far as getting interested in STEM? When they're in elementary school, junior high, senior high, how do you approach that?
Sure. At the end of grade school, by the time 8th grade rolls around, you'd lose them. If you don't get them, I can't do math. And they say, I'm not good at math. Well, why not? Well, I don't really, it hasn't been shown to them it's fun, that you can do something with it. So I think by 8th grade, if you can get kids you can capture their imagination about it and what's fun about it, then they're going to stick with it. Give them something to see that they can do with, not just numbers on a page, but what numbers mean, why you can't divide by zero, and show them an example of dividing by zero. People die when you divide by zero. Mm-hmm. And I think you make that connection and you go, I had no idea.
I'm speaking with John B. Herrington, a former naval aviator and NASA astronaut, and also author of Mission into Space. You can find more information about his work on his Facebook page, Commander John B. Herrington. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to rate it on whatever podcast feed you're listening to it on. These ratings go a long way in increasing the popularity of my podcast, and I'm grateful for any support you can give me. Please sign up for my newsletter at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. Please post your comments and questions about this podcast or the episode on Facebook at Spacewalks Money Talks or on YouTube at Spacewalks Money Talks. You can contact me directly on Twitter at SpacewalksMT and on Instagram at Spacewalks Money Talks. If you like military history, please listen to my podcast, Military History Inside Out, located at warscholar.org and militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, please listen to my podcast, Full Contact Nerd, also located at chrisalvarez.com and fullcontactnerd.com. Now back to the podcast. Do you see any fixes that are needed in educational policy in this regard?
Well, I think one of the things you can get into kids' curriculum, give them examples of their that they can take home. That they can go. I take home in the sense that it goes back to the idea of what their ancestors did. Yeah, in terms of policy, I think if you can get in their curriculum, I want to bring something and make as I always called it a cultural toolkit, something I can bring into the teacher to let her or him present something to students that they can identify with. I was taught college algebra, and my college algebra book, there were two of them, exact same name, but one of them had Leonardo DiCaprio in it. And it had some stuff that was fun. It had something that captured people's attention, not just the numbers, but something they could identify with. And I think that's what people don't want is to be bored. They want something that's going to spark their interest. And if you can find something like that and get it into curriculum, then I think, kids will take more ownership of it.
Now, as a former astronaut, how would you, schools are cutting back in different ways, different programs to save money and because of budgets, and they're cutting back on physical education and art. What's your concern about that?
Well, I think, what did Einstein once say? Science is art and artists are scientists. Something, I don't know the exact quote, but there's neat thing is that there's a creative bent to what we do. I think being able to problem solve and being creative in your problem solving goes along the idea of art. People don't necessarily say STEM anymore; they say STEAM, and they include that art component in there. And I think it's important is to get kids a chance to kind of this idea of expressing themselves and being able to problem solve. My daughter's, one daughter is a graphic artist. My oldest daughter never really was into math at all. She got a degree in art, graphic art, and then later on she went back and learned how to program. And now she does a lot of programming and does a lot of work on the computer for the artwork and some stuff she programs. So she's figured that out. My other daughter is a stylist, a cosmetologist, and she loves to create things, doing hair and stuff. So they both have a creative bent. I mean, they didn't follow me down the engineering path, which is fine. But I want them to express themselves and be able to be creative. They have this creative nature about them. They like to make stuff. One of the things when I did my research, one of the girls who was in my subject group, she said, I've got to make a rocket and I got to color it and I got to make it personal.
Yeah.
Talk about making a rocket personal. I mean, that's kind of a neat thing to do is they find something they take ownership of. And I enjoyed that.
So I see that that you've done some work within the space industry. Can I ask you a few questions about space business?
Sure.
So from your viewpoint, what in space business, technology, or policy are you most concerned about and why, either with exploration or space commercialization?
Well, a couple things. One, now that I'm no longer in NASA and I'm not, hey, send John to the moon, I'll go in a heartbeat. Send John to the Mars, I'll go to Mars. because that was my business. Now, stepping outside of that, looking back on it, I say, okay, well, there's this commercial component to it. As I left the office in 2005 to work in a commercial space world, I was one of the first astronauts. Rick Searfoss and myself, I think, were the first two, Jeff Ashby maybe. And so I had to, I went to a business where I was going to fly paying passengers in space. Mm-hmm. And we won the same agreement that SpaceX did. Unfortunately, we were owned by a millionaire, not a billionaire. And we didn't have the $400 million that we couldn't raise the money to match what NASA would give us. Then Elon Musk didn't have that problem. And he's been very successful. I mean, gosh, they just flew 2 humans on the Dragon the other day. That was great. Mm-hmm. So, there's a commercial aspect to it, but who pays for the commercial aspect? NASA. If NASA wasn't paying them to do it, they wouldn't be doing it. It's an expensive endeavor, and what other launch platform there is, what else would be launching, I don't know. But he gets billions of dollars from us, the taxpayers, mm-hmm. to fly his vehicle. So it's commercial in the sense that it was started by a private company. The space shuttle was built by a private company, or built by Rockwell and flown by United Space Alliance and such. Mm-hmm. So the only difference is that NASA doesn't own the vehicle. NASA rents or leases a vehicle essentially mm-hmm. from a private company. The idea of budgets, its idea is that now we're going to go to the moon in 2024. That sounds nice. One, why? And two, where's the money? Mm-hmm. I think they've appropriated maybe $2 billion, 1.4 or $2 billion initially, but it's going to take you like $30 billion to get there, and that's 4 years away. And they just let a contract out for a lander. I don't see it in this political climate. A Democratic-controlled House appropriating money for a Republican president's wish list to get to the moon in 2024. Mm-hmm. What is the rationale for going? Why are we spending that money? We've done it before. Are we going to stay and to mine the moon? Well, okay. Are we mining the moon for the U.S.? Are we mining the moon for the world? Are we mining the moon, or is China going to mine? So I have this much broader picture of it since I've stepped out of the office, is that we have a lot of issues down here that we can't seem to resolve. Mm-hmm. And taking those same issues to space, if you can't resolve them down here, how you can resolve it up there? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of I never looked at it that way, but I've kind of stepped back with a different opinion about it. Mm-hmm.
Now, the impression I get, sort of with the current space race, is that China has the resources and the motivation, but the U.S. still has a lot of the necessary technical skill and experience to make travel to the moon and then on to Mars happen. Is that a correct assessment, and what's your impression of that?
Well, who's on the moon right now?
Well, China has. Yeah.
China's on the back side of the moon. Mm-hmm. So they have the technical capability to do it. They have resources that don't require the Congress to vote on it, and the public's support of it. Mm-hmm. So they can pretty much do what they want. Mm-hmm. And if that's their goal, once again, what is their goal? Mm-hmm. Well, why are they trying to achieve that? So if you want to talk about a space race, I don't see us having a race right now with the Chinese. Mm-hmm. I see us having a commercial space race, between Boeing and Sierra Nevada and Orbital or SpaceX. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of companies vying for the commercial dollars. The only two reasons to fly in space really are political or commercial. Mm-hmm. We did the space race in the 60s and 70s because we wanted to beat the Russians. We did that by the end of the 60s. And then now it's commercial, is that, well, now folks are vying for the commercial dollar. If you can't make money doing it, you're not going to put money into it. No one's going to invest in it. Mm-hmm. And if there's no political reason to do it, then my question is, why are we doing it? Because it's their thing, doesn't hold water when you have other issues that you have to pay for.
Yeah. How about space tourism? Do you see that as a decent business model?
I left the office to do that. But at the same time, people have a lot of discretionary income. There's a lot of folks that are really rich. Mm-hmm. And there are folks that will pay $200,000, to get 4 or 5 minutes of weightlessness and to say they went to space. Mm-hmm. And then that's, for them, something to say, I went to space, and that's great. People paid, $30, $40, $50 million to fly on the Soyuz. and they've gone to the space station. If people can make it safe, if these companies can make it safe, and they can do it routinely, bring the cost down, more people get a chance to do it. I look at it as commercial aviation in the 20s and 30s and 40s. A lot of stuff. We've been killing people for a long time in airplanes.
Yeah.
Honestly, we really have.
Yeah.
But it's gotten much safer the more you do it. You brought the cost down. I see that in commercial space at some point in time. I don't see it the next 2 years. I don't see it maybe the next 10 years. I think it's going to take some growth, because the minute you blow up a rocket and you kill paying passengers, we quit flying the shuttle because of Columbia. People cannot tolerate, the government didn't want to tolerate, losing people. And that's unfortunate, because the shuttle was a remarkable vehicle, but it was a very complicated vehicle. But we stopped it when we started killing people, and it's going to happen again. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't want to see it happen, but I think at some point in time, a rocket's going to blow up on the pad. We killed, they killed a gentleman, died on the Virgin Galactic on their vehicle. So it's engineering. It's a tough thing.
Yeah.
But can you do it? Can you do it routinely and safely so that people, you can do more often. The more you do it, the safer essentially it's going to be, just like commercial aviation.
Yeah. I mean, it's an endeavor where everyone's trying to push the envelope, so there's going to be...
Yeah, you want to push the envelope. If people are paying to push the envelope, they're paying to come back and talk about it. They're not paying to... Right. They're not paying to, to die and not come home.
Yeah.
But there's folks who'll do that and go to Mars. They'll pay and go to Mars one way. I wouldn't do it, but there are people out here that would. So I like the Earth. Earth's a good place we live.
Are there any benefits to building another space station? A bigger one that's more. I've heard talk of creating sort of an orbiting hotel for people to go up and hang out at and come back down.
Well, they're talking about doing that with the space station. I have friends working in one of my crewmates actually, Mike Lopez Alegria. He is in a company. I apologize, I don't know the name off the top of my head. The idea of having a habitat on space station and turning it into have some tourism capability to it. Also, I think Bob Bigelow out of Las Vegas. I met him some time ago. He has the habitat. There's a hab out there flying out beyond the orbit of the Hubble. That's inflatable habitat. So I think people are looking that direction. But once again, who controls the space station? The Russians and the Americans. We have two mission controls that both have guidance and have control over the space station. Well, that costs money. And if governments don't fund it, I don't see the private sector paying the billions of dollars it's going to cost to operate the thing every year. I mean, you only do that if you return on your investment. Right? That's a lot of money spent getting people to space.
Yeah. So either an education or space business, do you see any issues that could easily be fixed or addressed? For
space business, I think the fact that Elon Musk just launched, 2 Americans off U.S. soil is great. I mean, you look at the interest; it was huge. And if you can do it routinely, and then maybe next year start taking, of the 7 seats I think on board the Dragon, 4 of them, maybe go to paying passengers. They're talking about, oh my God forbid, doing a movie on the space station. I heard that the other day. There's a part of me that looks at the space station, what we did, and what we assembled it as an orbiting laboratory, as an orbiting engineering platform that's been in space 6 times as long as it would take us to go to Mars and back. We've had people on board every minute of every day since 2000. And that's phenomenal. And we don't, you don't hear about that much. But to turn it into a movie set, to turn it into a place where people can float and look out the window, I don't know if that's what our money was spent to do. That we as taxpayers invested in other countries, not just us. This is the neatest thing about the International Space Station is it's international. I worked with the people that I was trained to hunt as a naval aviator. Right. And I lived in Russia. I worked with Russians. It was great. I loved it. That I think is one of the biggest benefits of the International Space Station is that the cooperation on that level. The higher ups need to figure out how to get do a little bit better job of it. But as astronauts and cosmonauts, I think we all, we figured it out. We knew what we were doing.
As far as higher education for these different space sciences, are there any challenges that you'd like to see fixed as far as helping graduate students?
The challenges, I think, if you can motivate interest, if you can generate interest in people that want to learn how to do that. What they saw the other day, I'm going to work for SpaceX now. That's what, students are going to want to get engineering degrees. I grew up in an environment where we wanted to go to space because we were going to space. So the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs generated the interest in the generation that did the space shuttle and the space station. What is SpaceX going to do with Boeing or Sierra Nevada or those companies are going to generate the interest in the next generation of kids to want to do that next great thing. And that's where it comes from. It's I think for all the good that Star Wars and Star Trek and those type of things, they generate interest. They're not the reality, but they do generate interest in people to accomplish some really difficult goals.
What do you? So I've heard that another person I've interviewed said that there might not be enough jobs within specifically the satellite industry. That there are maybe too many people training for the limited jobs that will be out there. That essentially there will be a contraction in the number of companies working on space issues. That there's a lot of jockeying right now. Does that make sense to you? And what are your thoughts on that?
I haven't heard that. I kind of wonder what the rationale is for that. Space is a big place. If you can generate a market for something, if you can generate interest, there's something you can do. There's something people are going to want to pay money for. I don't see it being a contraction. I think if you bring the cost down, more people are going to do it. If you can bring the factor of 10, say from $10,000 a pound to $1,000 a pound, which is really kind of the goal. I'm not sure what Elon Musk, what his target is, but people talk about that factor of 10. Then more people are going to have to, people want to pay $10,000 to do it. Well, how many people pay $1,000 a pound to do it? You generate more interest and at a lower cost. More people will do it, like flying airplanes for that matter. And I'm in a train station.
Yeah.
That's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. So again, within the space business or education, are there any issues that you have noticed that people aren't talking enough about
the idea of taking money away from education. I mean, that's the issue. If you want kids to be talented scientists, engineers, you need to fund education in a manner that kids do want to learn. Get the ability to learn the math. You can't do the math, you can't do the science. Mathematics is the core to all the technical fields. It really is. I'm a mathematician, so I say that. But really, if you can't do the math, you can't do the other stuff. So how do we keep funding education and pay teachers enough such that you get interesting and qualify people who come out and teach, and be that teacher that has a background in engineering, in the sciences, and they can come in and teach kids and get them motivated. What they did in their career, not just hey, here's numbers in a book. Here's what you do with those numbers. Here's how as an engineer or as a test pilot I used calculus, or I used differential equations, or I factored polynomials. It didn't make sense because there's a practical application to that. That's a really tough one to answer. It's going to take. You can't just throw money at it, but it helps.
Yeah.
It helps to fund it. The more people will do it.
So let's say you were head of NASA for a day or a week. I'll give you. Let's say you had a year at NASA. You were in charge of NASA. What would you do? And maybe they're doing it right as far as education and promotion of space and that sort of thing. Is there anything you'd like to see implemented or expanded or anything like that?
Well, I remember talking to Jim Bridenstine some time ago, and I know Jim from Oklahoma, current NASA administrator. And at the time, I had talked to him about how NASA's budget had been cut in education because he said it was, what did the Trump administration say? They were duplicating efforts, so they cut the budget for NASA education. because other entities were doing it. Well, nobody does it like NASA. Kids don't look to, unfortunately, National Science Foundation for inspiration on, stuff of the stars. They look at NASA for the astronauts, they look at NASA for the scientists, for the launch vehicles, those type of things. So NASA has a unique platform to motivate kids to want to learn. Given that, because we're all interested in what's in space. We all want to know what's out there. It's a fundamental question we all have. And I think NASA is uniquely positioned to do that. And I think one thing they never did really well was get that message out. And I think they're trying to do it better. Jim talked about it as something he wanted to do. Is it promoting it in the way they're doing with, doing movies and stuff like that? I don't know. I don't think that's the right way to do it. But the idea is make stuff available. A lot of teachers do not know that NASA had educational materials, curriculum, available free of charge to schools and students. I go out with a rockets handbook to teach us, this is NASA's free for you to use, and it shows kids how to build certain rockets, how to test them, the process, not just rockets, but other things. And teachers usually don't know that unless they have an interest in NASA initially or talk to somebody that's done it. I think opening that up and making it more available to teachers and kind of put it for them so they don't have to look for it. Make it so they have to look for it. Make it available to them. And they go, oh, I didn't know. And then they can utilize it.
I'm speaking with John B. Herrington, a former naval aviator and NASA astronaut, and also author of Mission into Space. You can find more information about his work on his Facebook page, Commander John B. Herrington. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to rate it on whatever podcast feed you're listening to it on. These ratings go a long way in increasing the popularity of my podcast, and I'm grateful for any support you can give me. Please sign up for my newsletter at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. Please post your comments and questions about this podcast or the episode on Facebook at Spacewalks Money Talks or on YouTube at Spacewalks Money Talks. You can contact me directly on Twitter at SpacewalksMT and on Instagram at Spacewalks Money Talks. If you like military history, please listen to my podcast, Military History Inside Out, located at warscholar.org and militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, please listen to my podcast, Full Contact Nerd, also located at chrisalvarez.com and fullcontactnerd.com. Now back to the podcast. I guess it sounds like there's not adequate outreach to teachers themselves then, or is there a program in NASA to educate teachers on what there is out there?
Yeah, there was. I'm not sure right now if there still is, but back when I was there, teachers would come to different NASA centers, their areas of expertise, be it NASA Ames or Huntsville, Marshall Space Flight Center, Kennedy Space Center in Johnson, Glenn Research Center, all these different places. People within that local area could utilize NASA, and they would go have teacher workshops and stuff. There were education workshops. I participated in them as an astronaut with teachers, and they get motivated. They're fired up. They come home and they go blah. They dump it on their students, and that's great. I don't know if they're still doing it to that extent. I'd heard they cut back on the education budget, so I think that took a chunk out of it. But I can't say that specifically. Once again, how much, where's the money going to go? How much money is there? And where's it going to go? Is it going to go to the Mars? Is it going to go to the moon? Is it going to go to help educate kids so that we can go to Mars someday? If you don't motivate them now to be, to get the education to be able to solve those problems, we won't be going anywhere. The generations are going to die. Generations are going to die out, and we need to keep inspiring that next generation with something.
Yeah. Something cool that you put in your Mission to Space book was sort of the glossary, the Chickasaw words.
Yeah, I thought that was great. The idea is that, what's a word for astronaut? Never had a word for astronaut. The idea is that it's a very descriptive language. And so what does an astronaut do? And they came together and said, well, in my case, I walked above the earth. And so Abba, above Noah, Walker, above Walker. So Chickasaw Abba Noah would be my name or what I am. A Chickasaw spacewalker, above Walker. Yeah, I think it's pretty neat.
Do you feel, I guess, and this might sound like a very negative question, it's not meant to be, but do do you feel that the cultural connection, the cultural spirit is as strong as it might be or might have been in the past? You know, does that still instill the kind of pride it should?
Yeah, I think, when I was growing up, my grandmother, my great-grandmother spoke the language fluently, but she wouldn't speak it to anybody except people her own age. For whatever reason, she chose not to, teach us that. If my grandpa knew it, he didn't teach to my mom. I've learned more, as an adult than I ever knew as a kid. I learned more Creek words from my dad because my dad went to school with kids who were Creek. But, I've always been proud of, my heritage. On my mom's side, I'm Chickasaw. On my dad's side, I'm English and Scottish and Norwegian somewhere. But on both sides of my family, all kind of came together in Indian territory. My one grandmother was already there. The other great-grandmother came in around the turn of the 20th century. So the product of two different cultures. Always been very proud of both of them. The Chickasaw part of it, being a member of the rest member of the tribe is what came to NASA's attention. And I think I take great pride in the fact I get to share my heritage with kids that never had a role model in that position. So I think that culturally it's just as strong, and probably more so now, because before there was a lot more, the idea early on of assimilation and taking Indian out of it and that type of thing. No, that's not. You don't have to do that. Be very proud of who you are, where you're from, what your ancestors did. If they hadn't done what they did, I wouldn't be here we having this conversation with you. They gave me the opportunity to walk this earth by the fact that they were able to survive, countless incursions upon their livelihood, and my tribe survived, is doing quite well. So, and I think a lot of tribes look back on what challenges they had, in the history of this country. And have done quite well given all the things against them. Okay. There's a lot of pride in that, a lot of cultural strength in that.
So you're seeing progress right now, not any kind of regression in any kind of way.
I wouldn't say regression. I think there's challenges, like say right now this COVID pandemic has really affected, like say the Navajo Nation. Incredible number of per capita deaths, people that are affected as well as deaths, and here that's in our country. And how are we letting that happen? How's our government not providing the resources? We're talking about sending resources to this country, that country, this country. Well, why can't we're sending them to Russia? Why can't we send them here?
Right.
Why can't we send all the ventilators down there? Those type of things. Can't we support what's going on in this country? Because this is, a lot of, part of my family is already here, been here for, centuries. The other part, came along later. We're all in this together. Let's help each other out.
Yeah. So your progression from Naval Aviator to astronaut, was it sort of a premeditated, a planned progression, or how did that go?
Well, it started off, I joined the Navy because I tutored a guy in calculus who was a Navy captain who flew Dauntless dive bombers in World War II. And he convinced me to join the Navy. I flew as a kid, but it wasn't until much later that I actually thought, well, I could do this for a career. And I joined the Navy, and I went off and I hunted Russian submarines for a few years. I used to dream about it as a kid. I used to play in a cardboard box dream I was going to the moon. But it wasn't until I was in my first squadron. When I realized if I wanted to be an astronaut, I'd need to stay in the Navy and go to test pilot school. And then, you have to apply to it. It's a very competitive thing. I applied a couple times. And when I got there, I realized that, hey, all those people I watched on TV back in the 60s, half of them were Navy test pilots. Oh, by the way, their names are on the plaques of all the graduates. So you start seeing names like John Young, Alan Shepard, Gene Cernan, all these guys, Jim Lovell. These are all naval aviators, and they were naval test pilots. And so if you don't apply, you won't be an astronaut. And I needed a master's degree, so I changed my career path in Navy so they would send me to get a master's degree. And they did. They sent me to Monterey, and I got a master's in aeronautical engineering, and applied a couple times, and I was very fortunate to get an interview, and I guess they liked my story, and they could go to space with me for a couple weeks and not that I wouldn't be too chatty. But yeah.
So at what point did it hit you like, wow, this could actually happen? I could realize my dreams, like where in that?
Well, it's not that I realized that I could do that when I got a phone call, and said, hey, come down and we'll interview you. But it was the idea is that I applied, knowing if I didn't apply, I wouldn't have any chance. But I applied with the possibility, but I just thought it was a really, really slim, it's a slim possibility. But I had the requisite, I did well in my squadrons. I had, decent grades, maybe not early on, but I figured it out later on, and I did well on my master's degree. And so I think NASA looked at it and said, does he have the requisite, skill set? And like say, can we go camping with this guy for 2 weeks and get along with him? You could be this. I tell people, you could be the smartest person in your class. You could be the, top students. You could have straight A's. But if you can't talk to other people and you can't work with a team, NASA's not going to hire you. They're not. Yeah, I think you can be the smartest person in class, but if you can't work well with others, NASA's not going to hire you. So be competent, be a good communicator, be a good team player. Have a good solid background in something that NASA could utilize in their interest, and then that you can go through that little wicket, and I think I did.
So are you trained in flying the shuttle, or are there other duties that you trained at because you were a mission specialist, right?
Yeah, I was a mission specialist, but I was a naval aviator, so I still flew the jet. I got to fly in the T-38. I flew the front seat. I got my flight time as required, so I got 15 hours a month in the jet, which was great because it's a fast-moving jet. It's dangerous. You gotta think quickly, and that's space flight readiness training they call it. And so, but I didn't train to fly the shuttle. I flew the sim a bunch of times, and I got to land the sim. But I sat as a flight engineer. I was the guy that sat between the pilot and the commander and helped them. It's crew coordination. There's a bunch of switches, power sources, everything. We all work together to solve the problems that would always come up in our simulations, and hopefully not come up during actual flight, but we were trained for it. And so, and then I trained to spacewalk, and I trained to do move different cargo things and some experiments. And you're not specific to one area of expertise. You get trained in a bunch of stuff. And I think that's great. I mean, yeah, you get trained in a lot of different areas, and that helps everybody else out. We back each other up as well. So,
did you have any hair-raising moments during training that you care to discuss or can discuss?
During training?
Yeah.
Yeah, every launch, every entry, asset entry sim or hair on fire experiences. Since you can't simulate how exciting the launch is. So you do that by overwhelming the crew with a multitude of failures, all these cascading failures. So that you up the stress level that you experience on a real launch. You up that stress level by giving a lot of malfunctions that they're all coordinated, they all work together. One cascades into something else, and so that's where the stress level comes up. And we had numerous launches where most of the time, I'd say pretty much every single time we made it back somewhere, either to a east coast of the board site, Cherry Point or somewhere up the coast, or to Spain or Morocco or wherever. I think once we didn't quite make it.
Yeah. Oh.
And there was always one trainer. If she ever showed up in the training room, you know something along that line was going to happen. Sue Crippen, Bob Crippen, the pilot of the first space shuttle, John Young and Bob Crippen, his daughter was one of the trainers. And if Sue showed up into one of your sims, something was going to happen. You knew something was going to be pretty interesting. So that's fun.
So as you, and I'm just curious about the mental process as far as overcoming, stress levels. Is it more about just focus on the training and do it, or is it about take a deep breath, think it through? What's your process there?
No, it's know your systems. You have to know your systems really well, because it's not just a matter of throwing a switch. It's not a matter of throwing 3 or 4 switches. It's a matter of knowing why you're throwing that switch. It's a matter of knowing what powers that switch. Because you may throw that switch all day long, but if you lost the power over here, that switch doesn't work. And so, what we're all trained to do was to really know your systems really, really well, and to be able to translate that into when a malfunction occurs, why are you doing that specific thing? Not just doing it because you're supposed to do it, knowing why you do it. And I think, that's my training as a naval aviator. From the minute I sat in an airplane as a naval aviator, that was just drilled into my head. Is that don't just know how to do the procedure, know why you're doing the procedure, because that will help you out. Because things don't always go as planned. Procedures are based on what the engineer thinks, and the pilot that works with them thinks it's going to be, but it doesn't always work out that way. And so knowing it really well, I ran into that as a naval aviator, ran into it as an astronaut. So.
Do you talk each other through, like when you hit a stressful situation, do you talk each other through it, or is it more like everyone's silently doing their part?
I think you all work together. You value the competence of the person that you're flying with. The neat thing about flying as a crew is that you have complete confidence in the people that are around you, that they're going to do their job, and that you're not going to. I think what we all don't want to do is not do our job. What did one of the astronauts say? Oh, please don't screw the pooch. I don't want to. It's not a fear of dying. It's a fear of making a mistake.
Right.
Because that could lead you to you dying. So don't make a mistake, and trust the people you're working with.
How long do you train as a crew before you go on a flight?
In our case, probably about 2 years. It would have been sooner, but they delayed the shuttle for some issues with the main engines, and so they backed up some launches. But I'd say I trained for just about 2 years. For that mission, ascent entry sims, orbit sims, flying, spacewalking, working in the neutral buoyancy lab, training for the spacewalks.
What was the moment? At what moment during the flight, during liftoff, and then out into space? At what moment did you really feel that thrill, or did you have the luxury of feeling the thrill when you went up?
Jim Weatherby, as a commander, he said, "I don't want anybody hooping and hollering on launch. I don't want you going, whee, He said, inside of T-minus 9 minutes, that's from when the countdown starts, pretty much we'll go all the way through to liftoff. Inside of T-minus 9, totally focused, do your job. And when you do your job well, then at the end of that, then you can enjoy what you're doing. But don't take liberties, do your job. And it was great. It wasn't, it wasn't like a hardcore, no kidding, unenjoyable thing. He knew we would do our jobs, and then once we did it successfully, then we'd have the chance to enjoy what we did. And that's what we did. We flew for 11 days, constantly busy. Constantly busy. And then on that 11th day, we're getting ready to come home. And I haven't had a chance to really enjoy being a tourist up here. And then we had bad weather in Florida, so I had a 3-day vacation coming home. We couldn't deorbit because of bad weather, so I flew around the Earth for 3 days looking out the window. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous. I got to be a space tourist for three days of essentially my 14-day mission. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So how about the spacewalk? When you stepped out, how was that feeling? Or was that, again, all about business?
That's one thing when you step out, the Earth is 220 miles below you.
Yeah.
You hang on kind of tight for a few minutes. But then you realize the tighter you hang on, the more tired you're going to get, and you don't need to. And so it just takes a little bit. You don't have safety divers around you anymore. It's just you and your spacewalking partner. And so you just take your time. And I think we all talk about slower is faster. Do things slowly, and you can get them all done. If you go too fast, you can get out of control. And the water works against you, so it slows you down. So it's hard to start, and it's easy to stop. Well, in space, there's no water, right? There's no atmosphere, and so it's easy to start and it's hard to stop. And so the idea is to be very deliberate, take your time, move slowly, and you'll get it done. You actually get it done faster than you did in the pool.
Right. And did you write a lot of after-action reports, comparing training versus what you came across?
Well, we came back. We had a debrief. We would debrief certain things that came up. We had some issues. A couple of things didn't work. Had an interference problem with mobile transporter that goes across the front of the space station. Bumped into an antenna, and it made the thing get stuck. We don't know why. We ended up figuring it out, and then it fundamentally changed one of our spacewalks, and we did it on the fly. And one of the things I'm incredibly proud of on our mission is that when stuff didn't go as planned, we worked around it, and we did stuff we were not trained to do specifically, and we did it well. We did it really well. Actually did it faster than we did if we'd done it the normal way. Mm-hmm. And I'm incredibly proud of the fact that Mike and I were able to accomplish doing things when stuff broke and wasn't where it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was huge. Huge feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah. So who do you think are the better pilots, Air Force or Navy?
Oh, come on, that's a silly question. Of course, Navy. Well, no, I'll take that back. I'll say, well, you mean Air Force pilots or naval aviators?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Forgive me.
Yeah, that answers that question right there. Naval aviator, it's not a pilot.
Yeah. I should not have made that mistake. I apologize.
No, that's fine. No, it's great. It's fun season.
So was the flight everything you expected it to be?
Oh yeah, it was everything. They'll tell you certain things, but until you get out and experience it, it doesn't have the same. They'll tell you, oh, you may experience this, and you go, yeah, right, and you do, and you go, wow. Your mind will play games on you. Will flip you upside down when you least expect it. You mentally, you'll be right side up, the next second you're upside down in your mind. You haven't moved, but your mind thinks you're in the other position, and that's really cool. That's very freaky. Yeah. You get those high energy particles that smack in the eyeball and kick off a little flash of light. Yeah. That's an interesting when that happens, especially when you can't sleep.
Yeah.
Because you're floating. You're floating. You're trying to sleep. You're ever not touching anything. That's weird. But you get used to it. You do.
How are you secured when you're sleeping?
There's a sleeping bag. On the shuttle. Since we had one crew, we didn't do two crews where they have sleep containers, boxes. We just slept in sleeping bags. Yeah, we slept in sleeping bags, and I velcroed my head to the pillow. It's kind of fun. Big band comes over your forehead, and it velcros to the pillow. You don't really need a pillow because you're not laying on it. But you don't want your head to float up.
Yeah. And you did you docked with the space station, right? Or did you?
Yeah, we docked. Yeah.
And what was that like?
That was neat. When you see this little star in the sky, and as you get closer to it, that star becomes a vehicle. That was a neat. The idea is that you see this little star in the distance, this little bright object. You realize that's where you're going, and pretty soon it morphs out into this amazing structure and sitting in front of you. It's like, wow. And now you're flying in close formation at 17,500 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And you touch at less than 1/10 of a foot per second. So, you're going really, really slow. You're going fast, but you're going really slow together.
Right.
As you're moving. And you come together, and the space station's this huge thing. We lost a computer right before we docked. It was really weird.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty exciting, right? It was pretty exciting at the very, very end. And Jim did a fabulous job. He's a very, very competent, cool-mannered aviator.
Yeah. And Sue's thinking that's exactly why I put you through all this.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. That's the thing is you always, anticipate the worst and thank goodness it didn't happen.
Yeah. How far away was the station when you first saw it as a dot, as a star?
Oh gosh, I don't know how many miles that was. I can't tell you. You just see it. You're looking at it, but you're setting up computers. You're working really hard. It's like looking out the window, going, "Hey, look at that! That's so cool." You go. It's like, you ever seen the movie Vacation with Chevy Chase?
Yeah, a while ago.
He gets to the Grand Canyon, and she goes, "Clark, don't you want to look at the Grand Canyon?" He nods his head a couple times, says, "Okay, good, gotta go." You look out and you go, "Oh yeah, neat," and go back to work. Yeah. Because you're paid to do a job. You're not paid to be a sightseer. Mm-hmm. And then once you do your job, then look out the window.
Yeah. So having been through that, can you imagine a private company doing it the same way, doing it better, doing it less safety standards? How would you see that?
I wouldn't say less safe. I would say they have a different way of going about it. Mm-hmm. NASA has certain criteria, and as an astronaut, our focus is safety. We're not. The thing about NASA when I was working there and working the shuttle was that it was not about a profit margin. We didn't do anything with the idea of how are we going to make more money at this. So when you start looking at a commercial entity, at some point in time, between them, it's a business. They have a business plan, a business model they have to meet, and the hope is that does not override the safety part of it. And so, I wasn't involved in that process at all. I know people that were involved in the process and asked a lot of those difficult questions that hopefully, they were answered the proper way. I don't know if you knew in the SpaceX launch recently, they put the crew on board and then they loaded fuel, right? The first time in the history of human space flight, they put people on board the vehicle and then put fuel in it.
Huh.
It was always fueled first, because that was one of the most dangerous things you could do.
Yeah.
And then you put the people on board. So when I walked out to the shuttle, it was fully fueled. It had hydrogen, oxygen. It was venting off gas. It was like you walked up to this living, breathing being. Well, now SpaceX, part of what they needed to do was they needed to load the crew, and then put the fuel on. I can only speculate, and from an engineering perspective, is that they did that because this is really cold, cryogenic hydrogen, or it was liquid kerosene, I think, and oxygen, the high pressure liquefied oxygen, and so that boils off in the Florida sunshine. That boils off, and the more that boils off, the less you have to use.
Right.
And so the later you put it on the vehicle, the less boil off you have, the more performance you have. So to me, and not being involved in that discussions, is that they're doing that because they have a limited amount of performance. They need to maximize the amount of performance on the vehicle by putting the fuel on as late as possible. Well, to me, you're taking a huge risk. They blew up one, right? They blew up one on the pad, and so that was during the fueling process. So to me, the most dangerous part of this mission was fueling the vehicle with people on board, while it's sitting on the pad.
Yeah.
As it takes a spark with liquid oxygen, it takes a spark and oxidizer's right there, and the fuel's right there, and boom, and I don't know if the escape capsule would get away from it fast enough for that. I really say it can. So to me, that was the most dangerous part of it as a performance issue. Why? Well, is the vehicle too heavy? Could you have lightened the vehicle so we didn't have to worry about that? It's a huge engineering problem. And but NASA signed off on SpaceX's process, and NASA astronauts signed off on it as well. Otherwise, Bob and Doug wouldn't have been sitting, wouldn't have put their seats, themselves in those seats. They had confidence it was going to work, and that's great. It did a fabulous job. Like I say, you start looking at it from an engineering perspective, going, why did they do it that way? We've never done it that way before. Well, maybe you can do it that way, as long as you have the right, enough steps in the process that you minimize the risk. I think NASA, it's not about NASA taking risks. It's about NASA or SpaceX knowing what the risks are and mitigating those risks as much as possible. Like this whole pandemic thing we've got going on, right? It's a huge risk. It is. It's a risk to go outside. It's a risk to be sitting here in this lobby, talking without a mask on. But at the same time, how do you mitigate the risk so that you don't catch it? You don't go out as often. You wash your hands more often. You don't touch your face as often. So the risk is there, but what do you do to mitigate that risk so it's not going to hurt you? And that's the same thing, from a spaceflight perspective. How do you minimize the risk that you've calculated are there, and how do you make it acceptable? How do you minimize it so it's acceptable and you can fly people without killing them?
I think one of the, sort of in that vein, I think one of the things that might confuse the general public is, we've gone to the moon before, we know how to do it. Why is it taking so long to do it again? We have the technology, the know-how.
We don't have the budget.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the budget was, but we had a continuing budget over the period of a decade that was never decreased, or increased. And in now dollars, I'm not sure how much that was. But we had through three different administrations, through Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, we had a Senate and a House that authorized and appropriated funds to NASA to be able to get to the moon by 1969, and that was great. Look now, you got a Democratic-controlled House, you got a Republican president, you got a Republican-controlled Senate. I don't see the House appropriating the funds to make it possible to get to the moon in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. In the political climate we have right now, I don't see it happening. And that's unfortunate. If we had two houses, if we had both houses of Congress, that worked together and didn't squabble like they do, and worked together for the good of the nation, which we did in the 60s, given all the other stuff going on, 1968, and the assassinations and the riots and everything else, we still got through that because we had motivation as a country, as administrations that saw that the money was there to make it happen. He let people solve the problem because they had the resources to do it. I don't see that right now. I see it as a pulling teeth to get to where they want to go right now.
It feels like right now what they want is for NASA to learn how to do it on the cheap. You can do it now. Now do it on a budget. I don't know. That's just speculative.
Well, people always ask me, what's it like to fly in a vehicle that was built by the lowest bidder? Yeah. I never looked at it that way. I never looked at it that way. I looked at it as people had money to do it competently and do it as best they could with the funds they had, and they did a great job. Mm-hmm. As difficult and as technically challenging as the space shuttle was, people did a great job. I think they did, and they pulled it off, and we got to the moon, and we built the space station and stuff. So, I don't, as astronauts, you don't look at it as the money. You don't even think about it. Mm-hmm. That's not it's not your pay grade. Work with the people. If you have confidence that people are doing their job and doing it properly, and you have input into that, then it's great. If you don't have input into it and you wonder why people are doing stuff, then that's not good. And that's a nice thing about the astronaut corps, I thought, was that we all played a part in the design development of the vehicle, be it from a crew operational perspective, displays, procedures, those type of things. We worked together to make it happen. And that's what test pilots are trained to do. They're trained to be the bridge between the engineering community and the operational community. Mm-hmm. And as astronauts, that's what we did. We didn't just fly in space. You got to fly in space. Everything else you did was support everybody else flying in space. Mm-hmm. You worked all the systems. You were the expert for the office on this system and that system, and you helped your friends fly in space. Then you got your chance to go.
Mm-hmm. Being a test pilot sounds like just the most. It takes some guts to be a test pilot. Is the way I see it.
Well, I think people look at test pilots as flying new vehicles and pushing the envelope, as they say. Hmm. Well, not a lot of new vehicles are being built. Back when I was a test pilot, we were upgrading the planes that had been flying that were as old as I was. Hmm. So I was upgrading systems on airplanes, and you still have to test them. Mm-hmm. You can't just throw something into the vehicle and expect it to work. You have to test it. So I may not have been testing new aircraft, but I was testing new systems. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with Space Shuttle. From the very first flight to the very last flight, it was a flight test program. Hmm. We were always doing something different software upgrades or whatever, different displays. So as astronauts, we had to support that effort and make sure it worked. It was designed to do what it was supposed to do, and it was operated the way it was supposed to, to get the most out of the system. Mm-hmm. It's always not flying a new jet. Mm-hmm. It's flying a new radar. It's flying a new radio. It's flying a new, those type of things. A new dome on the outside of the airplane.
Oh, okay. So now it doesn't seem like such a big deal. I'm kidding.
There you go.
Yeah. How'd you feel when they ended the shuttle program?
Oh, that sucked.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends that worked at the Cape and, got laid off,
Ooh.
Got furloughed, they lost their houses. I mean, it was a very, very sad point in time for a lot of my friends that I worked with at the Cape on the Space Coast there. And then SpaceX came in, other companies came in and started to, early on, as they weren't hiring people that were NASA engineers. They wanted a new breed. That's what I'd heard.
Yeah.
They didn't want to hire the people that had the expertise because that's the way NASA did it. We want to do it a different way. And I think they came around. I know folks worked for SpaceX, and then as it's got being successful, and they started saying, yeah, these people really know what they're doing, and they start hiring more people, a lot more people with the expertise to do it. And I think they've done incredibly well. I mean, how many rockets have we ever seen land back on a pad? That's fabulous.
Yeah.
That was really, really neat. See it go up and come back? Wow. We should just seen it go up and go away.
Yeah, and that's it. So that leads to my next question. What excites you most about space right now?
Oh, it's watching my friends fly. I mean, it's neat to sit back and kind of watch to watch them do their thing on a new vehicle. That was really neat. I know Bob Binkin and Doug Hurley. They were a couple classes after me. It's fun to watch. When you watch humans fly in space, it's one thing. When you know the humans flying, it's something else.
Yeah.
When it's family members, it's something else. It takes on a whole different meaning. And you could tell by the number of people that watched it and the interest. People care about people on board. It's not necessarily the technology, but it's the fact that just humans doing it. That's where you garner the interest. We've sent robots to Mars, which is fabulous. We personified the robots. You know that? You got your curiosity, and you name them things. And then, it could be a robot, but if you can put it in terms that it captures a person's imagination, like you're there, that takes on more excitement. When you put people on board a rocket has flown numerous times, but now you got people on the end of it. It's different, and it gets your heart pounding a little bit more. More people turn out to watch.
Do you expect any? Are there any technological advances that you expect to see sometime soon in the space business?
I worked with Franklin Cheng Diaz. I don't know if you're familiar with Franklin. Franklin is Costa Rican. Came to the United States when he was a teenager, I guess. Ended up getting a PhD, astrophysicist. Well, he has a thing called VASMIR. It's a variable ISP. It's an instantaneous specific impulse. It's the amount of delta V, I guess, that you can get out of a rocket engine. Well, he uses charged plasma. He fires a charged gas through a nozzle that's made from a magnetic field because it's so hot it would melt the metal. Well, this is variable thrust essentially that it can burn halfway to Mars and turn around and slow you down. Where now we fire the engines until we get to a certain speed, and we shut them off. And we coast all the way there.
Right.
We get to there, and we turn around and we fire the engines to slow down. Well, that's what we do on the space shuttle. We fire the engines and we coast for how many ever days, and then we turn around and slow down to come home. Well, if we go to Mars to cut down the time to get there, you need to have can you develop a system, an engine that doesn't burn as much delta V, not as much thrust, I should say, as a chemical rocket, but it burns for a long, long time. Then you can start off really slow and accelerate, and keep accelerating, so you cut that time to Mars, in a third, maybe. So you get there in a lot less period of time. Instead of 6 months, you get there in 2 months. Or I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Franklin's rocket engine, demonstrated. And if we're going to go to Mars, we need to figure out a way to do it that gets us there a little bit quicker.
So I don't know if you want to discuss your opinion on this debate, but do you think we should be going to the moon and then Mars, or just straight to Mars?
Test pilot, so I like to see us test something out before we go. You don't go out to the edge of the envelope initially. You start kind of batting around the middle. You start finding the edges. So if there's something that we're going to do to go to Mars, and we can use the moon to prove it, that's what we should do. I mean, I think that's the better way to do it, because if you send somebody off to Mars, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're gone for 3 years. They're not coming home right away. If you go to the moon and something happens, you get them home pretty quickly. And so there's I can't say we're going to go to the moon and colonize the moon right away, or the things we can learn on the moon that we can utilize on Mars in that manner. Then I think the moon's the right way to go about it. How you do that, that's a 1,000 different ways. I think if people have that they want to do it. I go back to the idea of terraforming Mars and making Mars an Earth-like planet. We're not doing a really good job here. I'm serious. I debated at Oxford last November, and my point was, our future lies in space. I said, what future is it? Is it the future of life on Earth, or is the future of Earth as a planetary species, going someplace into the solar system? Well, the solar system's a vast thing. The universe is vast. Their closest planet's 4.3 light years away, something like that.
Yeah.
Proxima Centauri, somewhere out there.
Right.
If the Voyager, which was launched in 1976, at 30 some odd thousand miles an hour. If it was going that direction, it would take 70,000 years to get there. We're not going to go there. The closest place we're going to go is maybe Mars. We're not going to go anywhere else in the solar system, in our lifetime. I don't see it. Humans. But once again, if we're going to go to Mars, why are we going? What's the rationale to expend the money to get there? Oh, we're going to go and make it a second Earth. Well, if we don't take care of our own Earth here, we're not going to be here to go there.
Right.
Ted Cruz was chastising Charlie Bolden, NASA administrator, Marine general, 4-time shuttle astronaut, NASA administrator, great guy. Mm-hmm. And Ted Cruz said that NASA is spending too much time looking back at the Earth and not looking out into the solar system where they need to go. Mm-hmm. You're wrong. You need to look out there and not back here. And Charlie, bless his heart, said, "Well, Senator, with all due respect, if the launch pad's underwater, we're not going anywhere." Mm-hmm. So this idea is that can we take care of our own planet and do what we need to do the right thing here before we go someplace else? Because if we can't solve our own problems here, we have no business going someplace else to do it. For as fantastical as it is, if we can't get along down here, can't work as a team down here, as a cooperative effort, we can't go to the moon and one side of us mine the moon, other side mine the other, mm-hmm. and carry our difficulties and our differences to someplace else. I think I made this point that I think the one person that got it right early on was Gene Roddenberry. For all all of Gene Roddenberry's eccentricities, mm-hmm. is that if you look at the flight deck of the Starship Enterprise, you see multiple ethnicities. You see people with different physical abilities. You see people with you're speaking different languages, all mm-hmm. coming together for to solve a problem. And we're doing this in the '60s.
Yeah.
And that was neat. I mean, why can't we do that now? We're doing it on the space station, which is great. Mm-hmm. Okay, but with all the other politics that play outside of that, affects doing that as a whole Earth system. I think I personally need to be able to solve that before we go off and carry our differences into the solar system. I'd go if they'd let me, but just the fact that you're riding the rocket. But we should solve our problems here. What's going on right here, right now, and expend our effort doing that.
I think the key word there is teamwork or team. Mm-hmm. Working together. Because it's such a hostile environment. That's how you survive, by depending on each other.
Yeah. Well, look what's going on in the United States right now. I mean, without the pandemic, you look at what's going on with the protests and now these riots and looting and everything. We're having a real hard time getting along in our own country.
Yeah.
We don't have I won't get into the politics of it, but it takes leadership. It takes somebody with a common vision to be able to lead people to solve problems. And mm-hmm. I think John Kennedy, saw a problem. That was a space race with the Russians, a technical issue. He put it in terms that this country could look up to as a solution of solving a technical problem. He didn't say we're going to beat the Russians. He said we have this goal. This goal is to do this because it's hard and we need to be able to solve the problem. And we did, and we carried it through three different administrations. Mm-hmm. And it took that type of vision, type of leadership. For whatever reason, he was able to put in something that people, worked the problem together. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I don't see that right now. There's too much animosity and too much division, because there's not being led. You can toss the goal out there of going to the moon in 2024. Well, it sounds nice, but mm-hmm. you need to get people behind it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't see that happen right now.
Yeah, that's I'm left with just silence. I'm like, yeah. Where can people find you on the web?
Oh boy, I'm on Facebook. I got a professional Commander John B. Herrington Facebook page. I got a personal page too, John B. Herrington. I don't have a website or anything. I haven't gone down that path. Mm-hmm. I'm very fortunate that I get an opportunity through word of mouth to be able to go and speak to students and to speak to different organizations. I work for my tribe in Oklahoma on their behalf. I work with students. I got my PhD. My wife and I were working, on the idea of motivating kids, and she was an English professor and a writer, and unfortunately she passed away a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And, so you kind of look at what we're doing together. What can I do on my own now? Mm-hmm. Kind of looking at what she wanted to do, and life tosses interesting things that challenges you. And, how do you overcome them?
Yeah.
Take it one step at a time. I may do a website at some point in time, but I have Instagram. I have all that stuff, but I don't tweet. I think I've sent 2 tweets in my entire professional career.
Fine. No apologies necessary.
Yeah.
Do you know, there's the small cubes, what are they called? The small satellite cube?
Picosats, yeah, picosats. We launched one actually on my mission.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we launched out of the starboard side of the payload bay, a little teeny bread box. It was ejected out on springs, and we undocked from space station. Within 45 minutes of doing the separation burn from space station, we had to set up cameras and record kicking out this little satellite over this point in the Earth where they could actually track it. And honestly, that was the hardest part of the mission, was getting those cameras set up to track this thing and getting the shots with the Nikon and with the payload bay cameras and kicking it out at the exact point in time we were supposed to. And I'll tell you, that was awesome. And that was the neatest shot, that little picosats on a tether that separated. The idea was that, you could launch these satellites off of another satellite. You could fly around and you could document any damage to the satellite. The idea was it was a autonomous vehicle that could fly around and inspect something, inspect the space station, inspect a GPS satellite. That was the idea behind it. I don't know where it's carried on from there, but that was fun.
Huh. But so I know that some universities now are, they've launched some. I know it's that they're cheap, but they're still expensive. It still costs money. I'm curious if any Native American colleges have done anything like that. Do you know of anything?
I know I've worked with some students doing some rocket launches. We do a thing out in Kenosha, Wisconsin, First Nations launch. Every year, a bunch of colleges get together, and they compete with Yale and Harvard and Princeton and these Ivy Leagues, and they go out and they build these incredible rockets, 7 feet long. And I went out a couple years ago and watched them fly those things. That was fabulous. Watching they put accelerometers on it. They have GPS. They have GoPros, the telemetry, and really neat to watch kids. They get excited. They're working as a team. They're loud. It's fun to watch the rockets fly. It's kind of fun to watch them come down without a parachute too. That happened. Had a screaming lawn dart land about 50 feet from us.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. It could have gotten hurt, but it didn't stage properly, and the parachute didn't come out. So, but different colleges that are actually working and flying satellites, I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Okay, I was just curious. So that's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
No, it's great. I mean, this launch of the day was fabulous to watch, and watching Doug and Bob fly into space. That's neat. It's back from United States soil again. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Hope to see more of it.
Yeah, and they'll be back in, I think it said 6 to 16 weeks.
I heard they're up for 3 months. I don't know if they're going to bring Chris Cassidy back or not. I think they're going to come back, just the two of them. But yeah, they're going to be up for like 3 months.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, well, thank you for speaking with me.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. You can find more podcasts like this on your favorite podcast feed under the title Spacewalks Money Talks. That includes Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. One great way to support me is to rate my podcasts, either good or bad. You can find more fascinating information at spacewalksmoneytalks.com, on YouTube under Spacewalks Money Talks, on Facebook under Spacewalks Money Talks, on Instagram under Spacewalks Money Talks, and on Twitter at SpacewalksMT. Don't forget to sign up for my weekly newsletter where I recommend newly published books. The subscription box is on my webpage. Thank you for listening.